Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the 25th entry in the Writer's Quote series here on the channel. This quote comes to us from the Waging War section of The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and it reads as such. It is the 16th bullet, which reads as such. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their rewards. I'm going to read that one more time. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their rewards. Now, every time that I use The Art of War for one of these writer's quotes, I really think about it in three different sections. I think about it as the writer against himself. I think of it as the writer, and I'm using himself because I'm talking about me. The writer against himself, the writer against the story, and the writer against the audience. Sometimes I will switch the story for the craft. It just depends really on how I feel about the quote itself. But let's talk about the writer against himself. The writer against himself, in this scenario, the anger that has to be channeled, is still the anger to kill. It's the anger to kill the story. It is the killer instinct needed to end a story, needed to wrap things up, needed to conclude instigation. As oftentimes happens with these videos, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about something with which I'm currently having trouble. I'm currently having trouble ending things. I've got beginnings for days, man. I can sit down and crank out 500 words on absolutely nothing, going absolutely nowhere about probably nothing. And by the time I get to the 800 word mark, I've got something about which this story is. But it doesn't matter at all unless I'm willing to conclude the story, unless I'm willing to end it. I think you've got to have a little bit of killer instinct in the back of your head. You've got to have a little bit of anger into which you can tap in order to really squeeze things out. I think that is necessary. Now, the quote does end with that there may be an advantage to defeating the enemy, to finishing the story. They must have their rewards. For the artist, for the writer, the reward that is present for finishing your story is the ability to redraft it. I throw this quote out time and again on the writerly series here on the channel. It comes from Neil Gaiman. I'm not really a big fan of it. If you didn't know, I'm currently reading through Stardust on the channel. I've got a read through for Stardust going on. He says that the second draft is to make it look like we knew what we were doing all along. That's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. The biggest perk to finishing a story is getting to write that story again. That is the reward that we have as a writer, that we can take something and make it a little bit better, a little bit more its own. Now, I'm going to read the quote one more time. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their reward. How does this come into play when it is the writer against the story? I think I have long believed, I came up with this in grad school, that killer instinct of the craft, that killer instinct in the tool bag against the story, that is being non-discriminate in your storytelling. The artist, in this case the writer, can afford to hold nothing sacred. The artist can have nothing precious or beyond reproach. To hold things precious, to hold things beyond reproach, to hold things holy, is to hamstring your art in such a way that it can be without reconciliation. To hold something precious and say, no, I can't talk about that. No, I cannot downplay that. No, I cannot minimize that. No, I cannot have a character that distrusts X or that hates Y. To hold those things as true outside of your story is to play into your own biases to the nth degree and will hamstring your storytelling and hamstring the stories that you can tell, two different things, and hamstring your audience from becoming invested. The example that I am thinking of most, I'm an atheist. There are there's atheist propaganda films. I'm not saying there aren't. And I'm sure that they have their own problems with the way that they represent things. But in Christian propaganda movies, and they exist, don't say they don't. In Christian propaganda movies, the atheist is always such a terrible character and completely unrealistic. Because it can't be that someone who is without God might also be loving and genuine and caring and all of these things. It is necessary that they cannot be for the story to work. That is something you can't hold precious. That is something that you can't put beyond reproach. Because so many of these films hold that thing precious and beyond reproach, someone like me who watches them is completely unwilling to accept it. Now, I'm not the target audience, but aren't I? Aren't I the target audience of a piece of art like that? I think those things are closer to propaganda than art, but aren't I the target audience for something like that? What do you, if not me, then who? Someone who already believes the faith going in to believe that the faith is strong enough to counter disbelievers? Well, it's kind of masturbatory. So that is being non-discriminate in your storytelling is the way that you use it. And the reason I say that that is the way that you use anger is because there's something precious to you. You have to be willing to switch that off in your mind, which feels like an act of hate. The reward for this is change in your story. Because you are allowing yourself to be outside of the personal realm in storytelling in this fashion, at this time, with this story, the way that comes across is genuine. Because it's genuine, you allow the story, then, the art, to dictate to the characters. And it becomes a symbiotic relationship. The art can dictate to the characters can dictate to the art. Neither of them is a slave to the storyteller. In this, the story can change as you're writing it and revising it, but your characters can change. Now, the writer against the audience. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their rewards. Kill your darlings. That's how you use anger. Now, a little bit different than holding nothing precious, because your darlings are simply the bits of craft in your story that you like. Why? And how does this pertain to the audience? Because if it's your darling, it's probably the audience's darling too. It's something kind of neat in the story. Kill it. Because by killing it, you force change. By killing it, you force the audience. You force the reader to approach the story in a different fashion. if it's static, nothing is gained, nothing is lost. Why did we read it? The reward in that is that your story will stick with the audience. Your story will stick with the reader. Your story will be there for your reader to reflect upon and reflect upon themselves, which is the key to literature being literary, right? Whether it is genre or not. The key to literature being literary is that the audience is able to reflect upon the self, not simply the characters involved. That is all that I have for this, the 25th Writer's Quote in the Writer's Quote series here on the channel. I have videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday here on Strip Cover Lit. I also have videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on my personal channel. You can go over there and find me talking about movie reviews and workouts and goal setting and music and all that sort of stuff. I do general vlogging type stuff over there. I do something a little bit more YouTubery than I do here on Strip Cover Lit.